My daughter-in-law called me a poor old woman in front of her colleagues from the tech company where she worked. She had no idea she was speaking to the founder and CEO. I didn't fire her. I gave her a new title dishwasher. Follow my story to learn what happens when the woman they call dead weight is the one who holds all the power. Grief has a texture. In the months after I lost my husband, Richard, it was the cold, unyielding feel of steel in our garage in Palo Alto. The world saw me as a young widow with a son, Mark, to raise a problem to be solved with sympathetic casseroles and pitying glances. But in that garage, surrounded by Richard's life's work, I was not a problem. I was a keeper of secrets. He had left behind a universe etched onto schematics and scribbled in notebooks, the blueprints for a data compression algorithm, so revolutionary it felt like a form of magic. The lawyers and well-meaning relatives advised me to sell it all. Take the money, Eleanor, they'd said. Focus on Mark. They saw a quick payout. I saw a legacy. They saw spare parts. I saw a language I had to learn. So I stayed in the garage, the hum of the old fluorescent lights, my only companion through the long nights. My life split in two. By day, I was Mark's mother, packing his lunch, attending parent-teacher meetings, putting on a brave face of normalcy. By night, fueled by black coffee and a sorrow so deep it felt like a physical weight, I became Richard's student. I surrounded myself with textbooks on coding and electrical engineering, their pages smelling of dust and possibility. I traced the lines of his schematics until they were burned into my memory. My fingers, once accustomed to gardening gloves, grew calloused from soldering circuit boards, bringing his theoretical designs into tangible, whirring life. This was my quiet rebellion. They saw a woman undone by loss, but in reality, I was being rebuilt. Every line of code I learned, every circuit I completed, was a piece of him. I was reclaiming a conversation I refused to let end. I sold my wedding ring, the last piece of Richard I wore on my skin, and a small parcel of land his parents had left us. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. It was seed money for the company I decided to name Nexus Innovations, a name that honored the connection between his genius and my resolve. My days became a relentless blur of sacrifice. I worked 2 jobs, a librarian by day, a freelance bookkeeper by night, all while raising a young boy who deserved a world I could no longer afford. Every spare dollar, every waking moment that wasn't for Mark was poured into Nexus. I wrote business plans on the back of diner napkins, negotiated with suppliers from a payphone, and built the first server prototypes on our kitchen table. I went from mother to maid to CEO often in the same hour. I didn't do it for wealth or for fame. I did it because it was the only way to honor the man I had lost and provide for the son I had left. This period of my life was a crucible. It burned away everything that was not essential, leaving only a core of unshakable purpose. I was building a world for my son with my own 2 hands, laying a foundation of sacrifice so deep he would one day stand upon it and forget it was ever there. That was the cost of being a mother, and it was a price I paid without regret. I was never a burden. I was the foundation, and I knew even then that a house built on a forgotten foundation cannot stand for long. Years of running Nexus Innovations had transformed it from a garage-born dream into a global tech behemoth. But the creature I had built now demanded a price I was no longer willing to pay. The endless board meetings, the interviews with fawning journalists who never asked the right questions. the relentless pressure to be a symbol. It had become a gilded cage. I was in my late 50s, and the life I had fought so hard to build for myself and my son was being consumed by the very success that was meant to secure it. I didn't want my legacy to be a stock price. I wanted it to be the quiet moments I had sacrificed for decades. So I began the process of a strategic retreat. This was not a surrender. It was a redeployment of power. I called my longtime lawyer, James Covington, the same man who had helped me file the first incorporation papers on a shoestring budget. Together, we architected my transition. The plan was simple in its elegance and absolute in its control. I would step down as the public-facing CEO. In my place, I appointed David Chen, a brilliant and fiercely loyal engineer who had been with me since the early days. He understood the soul of the company because he had helped me build it. The board resolution was passed unanimously. I retained the titles of founder and CEO emeritus, but more importantly, I retained the one thing that truly mattered: my 65% majority shareholding. My power did not reside in a corner office. It resided in the stock certificates locked in a vault, a fact that would be conveniently forgotten by those who only saw what was in front of them. I became a ghost in my own machine, a legend whispered about by the old-timers. My name slowly scrubbed from press releases and the company's public narrative. I had erased myself, choosing quiet, unseen control over the noisy performance of authority. With my newfound freedom, I turned my attention to Mark. He had married a young woman named Tiffany, a sleek, ambitious marketing manager with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I wanted them to have the stability I never had, a place to build a life without the struggle that had defined mine. I found them a beautiful home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, and as a gift, I provided the entire down payment. I transferred the funds directly, a simple, clean transaction. I watched as they signed the papers, their names going on to the deed of a home built on a foundation of my life's work. To them, the money came from a modest pension and some wise investments Richard had supposedly made. I allowed them this fiction. I cultivated the persona of a comfortable widow, a woman who had done well enough, but was now in the quiet twilight of her life. It was a camouflage, an armor of perceived fragility. I saw the truth in Tiffany's eyes the day I gave them the check. She held it with a kind of triumphant finality. Her gratitude was polite, but beneath it, I saw her calculation. To her, this wasn't an act of profound love from a mother. It was the final contribution of a woman whose utility had expired. She saw an old battery drained of its last charge, now ready to be set aside. She believed she was witnessing the end of my story. She had no idea she was standing at the beginning of hers. I simply smiled, a quiet, dotty, financially dependent mother, and let her believe it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people underestimate you. When my grandson Leo was born, I moved in with Mark and Tiffany. It was meant to be a temporary arrangement, a helping hand during those first chaotic months. But weeks turned into a year, and my presence solidified into a quiet, permanent fixture in their home. And that's when the slow eraser began its work. It wasn't a loud or violent process. It was a campaign of quiet dismissals, of subtle shifts that were designed to make me feel like a guest in the home I had paid for. The first casualty was my armchair. It was a worn, comfortable thing, a chair I'd read stories to Mark in as a boy. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find it gone, replaced by a cold leather monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a sterile corporate lobby. "I hope you don't mind, Eleanor," Tiffany said, not looking at me. The old one was just so dated. I found my chair later pushed into a corner of the garage covered in a dust sheet, as if it were a body waiting for burial. I said nothing. I always said nothing. My opinions became unwelcome suggestions. When I offered a tip for her rose bushes, a skill I'd honed over 40 years, she would give a tight, patronizing smile. "Thanks, Eleanor, but I think the app I downloaded has it covered." I was being rendered obsolete, my lifetime of experience replaced by a smartphone. At family gatherings, the erasure became more public. She stopped introducing me as Eleanor. I became Mark's mother, a title that stripped me of my own identity and reduced me to a function of my son. I was an accessory, a piece of his history he was expected to manage. The most jarring moments came when Tiffany spoke of her own career. Through a connection I had quietly arranged with David Chen, she had landed a mid-level management job at Nexus Innovations. She was immensely proud of this, and she would boast at the dinner table about her strategic vision and her tough but fair management style. She spoke of the company as if she were an expert, completely unaware that she was lecturing the woman who wrote its very first line of code in a cold garage. She was a tenant explaining architecture to the architect. Then came the whispers. I would hear her on the phone in the hallway, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "I just don't know how long we can do this," she'd complain to a friend. "It's like carrying dead weight. She eats, she takes up space, and what does she contribute?" Each word was a small, sharp cut. I, who had built an empire from grief and grit, was being described as a freeloader. I, who had sacrificed my youth to give my son a future, was now considered a burden on it. I became a ghost in my own life, a shadow that hurt. My presence was tolerated, but my personhood was being meticulously erased, one quiet, cruel act at a time. I saw the indifference growing in my son's eyes. He didn't join in the cruelty, but his silence was a form of consent. He was the passive accomplice to my slow disappearance. They didn't know that my silence was not weakness. It was observation. I was not fading away. I was taking notes. And paper remembers what people forget. The irony was a blade I swallowed every day. While Tiffany complained about me being dead weight, I was the invisible pillar holding up the roof of her entire world. From my quiet apartment, which they believed was my only asset, I managed the architecture of their lives with the click of a mouse. Each month, as Tiffany would sigh dramatically over the grocery bills, I would open a secure banking app on my encrypted laptop. A few keystrokes and a sum covering their mortgage would silently transfer from one of my holding companies into Mark's personal account. He never questioned its origin, assuming it was a dividend from a trust his father had left, a convenient fiction I had planted years ago. He saw a number appear, and he was satisfied. When they started planning a trip to Hawaii, I listened to Tiffany lament the cost for weeks. "It's just so expensive, but we deserve a break," she'd say, a pointed glance in my direction. I simply nodded, playing the part of the financially oblivious old woman. Later that night, I made an anonymous deposit into their designated travel fund, enough to cover flights and a luxury hotel. They celebrated it as a surprise work bonus for Tiffany. They toasted their luck. I cashed the truth. My love, my support, had become a ghost limb. They felt its benefits, but denied its existence. I was no longer a mother. I had become an ATM that was expected to dispense funds and then quietly disappear back into the wall. I saw the change in my son with a clarity that broke my heart. His affection had become transactional. He would call, his voice warm and engaging, to casually mention a car repair bill he couldn't quite cover. The day after the money appeared in his account, his calls would stop. His kindness had a price tag, and I was always the one to pay it. For a time I told myself I was doing it for my grandson, Leo, that I was ensuring his comfort and security. But I came to realize that was a lie I told myself to soften the blow. I was enabling them. I had built a pedestal for my son, and his wife had eagerly climbed up beside him, and now they were both looking down on me. I watched them live their comfortable life, a life built on my sacrifices and funded by my hidden wealth, and I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I was the foundation of the house, buried deep in the earth, unseen, unacknowledged, but utterly essential. They, living in the sunlit rooms above, saw only the surface. They mistook the stability I provided for their own good fortune, their own cleverness. They treated me like a crack in the plaster, a minor flaw in their perfect world, never realizing that without me, the entire structure would collapse into dust. My silence was not just observation. It was the quiet hum of the machinery that kept their world turning. And I knew the day was coming when I would have to turn it off. People forget. It is a human failing. They forget sacrifices, they forget kindness, they forget the foundations upon which their lives are built. But paper remembers. Ink holds a memory that time cannot fade and gratitude cannot rewrite. My power was never just in my wealth. It was in the words I had written down long ago. In the early days of Nexus, when it was still just a handful of us in a rented office space that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition, I saw the brutal nature of the burgeoning tech world. I saw brilliant minds discarded for being too old at 40. I saw collaborative spirits crushed by cutthroat ambition. I promised myself that my company would be different. It would be a place where innovation and humanity coexisted. With my lawyer, James Covington, I spent weeks not just writing a business plan, but a moral constitution for the company. We drafted the Nexus Charter and bylaws. They were not standard boilerplate documents downloaded from a legal website. They were a philosophy codified into law, buried within the dense legal language of fiduciary duties and shareholder rights. I embedded what we called the dignity clauses. Article 4, Section B was my declaration of war against the casual cruelty I saw everywhere else. It outlined a zero-tolerance policy for workplace bullying, with a specific and detailed subsection on ageism. It stated in unambiguous terms that an employee's value was to be measured by their contribution and wisdom, not their birth date. It mandated that seniority and experience be treated as assets, not liabilities. It gave HR the explicit power to terminate any manager, regardless of their performance metrics, if a pattern of age-based discrimination was proven. It was a mission statement with legal teeth. It was a promise I made to the engineers and staff who were betting their careers on my garage-born dream. I was telling them here, you will be valued until the day you choose to leave. Your experience is our strength. Your legacy is our own. As Tiffany boasted about her life at Nexus, completely oblivious, I would sit in my armchair, the one they had exiled to the garage, and which I had quietly moved into my small apartment, and sometimes I would review those documents. I would read the words I had written decades ago, and a cold sense of purpose would settle over me. My eventual actions were never going to be a whim. They were not the emotional reaction of a slighted old woman. They were to be the enforcement of the foundational laws of the company I had built. Tiffany, in her arrogance, saw me as a relic from a past she had no interest in. She didn't understand that I was the law. The paper in my safe remembered the promises I had made. It remembered the values I had enshrined in ink. And every day, with every boast about managing out the dinosaurs and every dismissive glance she threw my way, Tiffany was unknowingly signing her own confession. She was violating the sacred text of the very company that gave her a paycheck, and she was doing it in front of the one person who had the power to hold her accountable. The quiet campaign of erasure soon escalated into open warfare, waged with smiles and passive aggression. The slights became more pointed, more public, designed to cement my status as a ghost at their table. It began with small acts of deliberate forgetting. I would come to dinner to find the table set for 3. Tiffany would look up a mask of theatrical surprise on her face. "Oh, Eleanor, I am so sorry. My mind is just a sieve these days." She would make a great show of getting me a plate. Her apology, a performance for Mark, while the message to me was clear: you are an afterthought. Then she began to control my connection to the outside world. I had friends, other women I had known for decades, who would send Christmas cards and handwritten letters. One afternoon, I saw Tiffany standing over the recycling bin, tearing up an envelope I recognized from my old friend Martha. "Just more junk mail," she said breezily when she saw me. "From other old people, probably. No need to clutter the house." She was isolating me, cutting the threads to my past, ensuring her narrative of my irrelevance was the only one that existed. But the ultimate expression of her disdain came through her stories about Nexus. The dinner table became her stage and I her captive audience. She would describe her management triumphs with a chilling glee, detailing how she was streamlining her department by managing out the legacy employees. "They're relics, honestly," she declared one evening, swirling a glass of expensive wine. "They're too slow to adapt to the new agile workflows. They're leeches on the payroll, clinging to their pensions." She laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "I put Bill, the head of QA, on a PIP last week. He's been with Nexus for 20 years. Poor old guy looked like he was going to cry. But you have to be ruthless to get ahead." I sat in silence, my hands clenched in my lap. I knew Bill. I had hired him myself, a brilliant young engineer straight out of Stanford. He had 2 daughters and a wife who had battled cancer. He was the heart of his department. To Tiffany, he was just a line item to be cut. I said nothing. I simply watched my face, a mask of placid interest. But inside, a cold, methodical anger was taking root. This wasn't just about disrespect to me anymore. This was a desecration. She was systematically dismantling the very culture of respect and loyalty I had bled for. She was turning my company, my life's work, into a reflection of her own shallow, cruel values. I was no longer just a mother-in-law enduring slights. I was a founder, watching her legacy be set on fire. And I was the only one with the water to put it out. My silence was no longer patience. It was the gathering of evidence. It was the calm before the storm. The week of my grandson Leo's 5th birthday arrived, and with it, the calm before the storm. Tiffany was in a frenzy of planning not for a child's party, but for a corporate networking event disguised as one. The guest list was a who's who of her Nexus colleagues. The catering was ostentatiously expensive, and the theme was something cold and minimalist that had nothing to do with a 5-year-old's imagination. While she orchestrated this monument to her own ambition, I retreated. I went back to the one place that had always been my sanctuary, the garage. Tucked away in a dusty corner, I found a large wooden box. Inside were Richard's old woodworking tools, their steel still sharp, their wooden handles worn smooth by his hands. Beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a half-finished wooden train set. He had started it for Mark decades ago, but had never had the chance to finish. The engine was carved, but the cars were just rough blocks of pine. In the quiet hum of the garage, I began to work. The process was meditative, a conversation with my past. The scent of sawdust filled the air, a smell I hadn't realized I'd missed so deeply. My hands, now wrinkled and spotted with age, remembered the familiar weight of the tools. I spent hours sanding each block of wood, feeling the grain emerge, transforming rough shapes into the smooth, curved lines of a passenger car, a caboose, a coal tender. This train was the antithesis of everything Tiffany valued. It was not new or expensive. It had no brand name, no digital interface. It was a thing of pure legacy love, handmade and steeped in history. Its value was not in what it cost, but in what it represented: a connection between 3 generations, a tangible piece of our family's story. As I painted each car in bright primary colors, a cheerful red for the caboose, a sunny yellow for the passenger car, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was not just restoring a toy, I was restoring a piece of my own soul. I was reconnecting with the woman I had been before she was erased, the wife, the creator, the mother. When it was finished, the train was beautiful. It was simple, sturdy, and full of a love that was both old and new. It was the perfect gift for my grandson. As I wrapped it in simple brown paper and tied it with a string, a chilling certainty settled in my heart. I knew exactly how Tiffany would react. I was not just giving a gift to Leo. I was setting a test for his mother. I was holding up a mirror to her values, a mirror made of wood and paint and a grandfather's love. And I knew, with the cold clarity that had become my constant companion, that she would fail. This train was not just a gift. It was a catalyst. The party was a symphony of brittle laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. The backyard was filled with Tiffany's colleagues from Nexus, smug, ambitious people wearing expensive, minimalist clothing, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of their phones. I watched them from the periphery, a ghost in a cardigan holding a cup of punch I didn't want. Then came the time for presents. Leo, my sweet grandson, was buried under a mountain of ostentatious gifts, a drone that cost more than my first car, a tablet pre-loaded with educational apps, designer clothes he would outgrow in a month. Each gift was a performance, a demonstration of the giver's status. Finally, it was my turn. I handed Leo the gift wrapped in simple brown paper. His eyes, wide with a pure, uncomplicated joy, lit up as he tore it open. He gasped. "A train," he shouted, reaching for the brightly colored engine. But before his little fingers could touch it, Tiffany snatched it away. Her hand shot out like a striking snake. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with a scorn so thick you could taste it. "How quaint." She held the train up by one end as if it were a dead rat. One of her colleagues, a vice president with a shark smile, asked, "What is it, Tiff?" Tiffany addressed the entire room, her voice loud and clear. "It's just some old junk from his grandmother." She announced a dismissive wave of her hand. Then she looked at me, her face a perfect mask of theatrical pity. "She's a dear, but she's a poor old woman. She doesn't understand these things." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Poor old woman. The phrase echoed in the sudden, sharp silence of the backyard. I saw the smirks on the faces of her colleagues, the people who worked in the building I owned, who cashed the paychecks I signed. They were laughing at me. Then Tiffany delivered the final, killing stroke. She turned to me fully, her smile a weapon. "Eleanor, maybe this is all a bit much for you. The noise, the people. Why don't you go on home?" It was not a suggestion. It was an eviction. She was throwing me out of my son's home in front of an audience at my grandson's birthday party. The humiliation was absolute, a perfect, crystalline moment of cruelty. I looked past her, my eyes searching for my son. I found him standing by the grill, a spatula frozen in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He saw it all. He heard it all. And he said nothing. He did not defend me. He did not speak. In the ringing silence of that moment, something inside me did not break. It hardened. It turned from flesh and blood into something cold and unyielding, like granite. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing slights, of making myself smaller, it all ended. I turned without a word. I did not cry. I did not offer a defense. I simply walked away through the crowd of smirking faces down the driveway and out of their lives. The door to my heart, the one that had always been open for my son, had just been closed, locked, and barred forever. The drive from their house to my quiet apartment was a journey through a landscape of profound and terrifying calm. There was no rage, no firestorm of emotion. The years of suppressed pain, of swallowing insults, like broken glass, of enduring the slow eraser, it had all coalesced. The immense pressure had not shattered me. It had created a diamond. I walked into my apartment, the silence a welcome balm. I did not cry. I couldn't. The shock had built a wall inside me so thick that no tear could escape. I did not shout or throw things. My anger was not hot. It was a cold, motivating force, a clarity so absolute it was like seeing the world for the first time. I went through the motions of a life I no longer lived. I put the kettle on the stove. I chose a cup and a saucer. I selected a bag of peppermint tea. Each movement was deliberate, measured. I was not a victim reacting to trauma. I was a general preparing for battle. As I sat in my armchair, the very one they had exiled to the garage, and held the warm cup in my hands, I felt the last wisps of emotional fog burn away. There was no desire for revenge, no petty need to see Tiffany suffer. Revenge is a chaotic, messy thing. What I felt was a need for something cleaner, more final, the assertion of reality. I rose for clarity. The woman who had endured, who had made herself small to keep the peace, was gone. The woman who hoped for a crumb of affection from her son was gone. The mother who excused bad behavior for the sake of family harmony was gone. In her place sat someone else, someone colder and more resolute. I was no longer confused. I thought to myself, the words forming with a finality that was breathtaking. I was no longer waiting for an apology. I was planning. I finally understood. Tiffany was not just a cruel daughter-in-law. She was a symptom of a sickness, a rot that had crept into the company I had built. Her arrogance, her disdain for experience, her belief that cruelty was a management tool, these were not just personal failings. They were a violation of the Nexus Charter, a betrayal of the promise I had made to every employee who had ever trusted me with their career. The problem was not personal, it was systemic. The disrespect she showed me in the living room was the same disrespect she showed to my long-serving employees in the boardroom. The solution, therefore, could not be personal either. It had to be systemic. It had to be absolute. And the only person who could fix it, the only person with the authority, the knowledge, and now the will, was me, the founder, the majority shareholder, the poor old woman who was about to remind everyone what true power looked like. The phase of quiet observation was over. It was time for action. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and placed it carefully on the drying rack. Then I walked to the small, unassuming desk in the corner of my living room and opened a sleek, matte black laptop. Its surface was free of any branding. To an observer, it was just a computer. To me, it was the command center of my empire. Its existence was a secret known only to myself and James Covington. With a few keystrokes, I bypassed the public-facing Nexus servers and logged directly into the company's core architecture. The ghost in the machine was home. My fingers, steady and sure, flew across the keyboard. The years I had spent pretending to be a slightly dotty old woman fell away, replaced by the muscle memory of the CEO I had always been. I pulled up the live organizational charts, my eyes scanning the names and titles. I accessed the quarterly performance reports from Tiffany's department, cross-referencing them with salary data and tenure records. A clear, damning pattern emerged, a steady exodus of experienced, highly paid senior staff, replaced by younger, cheaper, and less qualified employees who were Tiffany's personal favorites. I accessed the internal memos, my stomach tightening, as I read her bloodless corporate jargon justifying the restructuring. She was dressing up her ageist purge in the language of efficiency. Then I made a call. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, a direct encrypted line. "Covington," a familiar, calm voice answered. "James." I said, my own voice level and cold. "It's Eleanor Vance. It's time." There was no surprise in his voice, only a quiet readiness. "I've been waiting for your call, Eleanor. The file is ready." We connected on a secure video line. James's face, now lined with the wisdom of age, but with the same sharp intelligence in his eyes, appeared on my screen. For the next hour, we worked. We were two old lions, quiet for years now, preparing for the hunt. We meticulously reviewed the corporate bylaws, highlighting the specific dignity clauses that Tiffany had so flagrantly violated. We examined the state and federal labor regulations regarding age discrimination. Then James opened the file he had been quietly compiling for months. At my request, he had been discreetly tracking internal complaints from mid-level managers. His file was a treasure trove of evidence, anonymous tips, reports of verbal abuse, and performance reviews that showed a clear, undeniable bias. The plan we formulated was not a simple firing. That would be too easy, too clean. It was a surgical corporate maneuver, precise and devastating. It was designed not only to remove Tiffany, but to lance the boil of toxic culture she represented. It was designed to send a shockwave through the entire company, a clear message that the founder was watching. This was not about punishing my daughter-in-law. This was about reasserting my ultimate authority and reminding every single employee at Nexus Innovations who held the final word. The quiet execution began at dawn. At precisely 7:00 a.m., as the first rays of sun were hitting the glass facade of the Nexus Tower, 2 emails were dispatched from the office of CEO David Chen. They were the opening moves in a perfectly orchestrated game of corporate chess. The first email was sent to every member of the executive board and all senior vice presidents. The subject line was stark and unusual. Mandatory emergency meeting founders level. The body of the email was brief, summoning them to the main boardroom at 10 a.m. sharp. The use of the term founders level, a designation that hadn't been invoked in over a decade, sent an immediate shockwave of panic and speculation through the company's upper echelons. Phones began ringing and encrypted messages flew as executives scrambled to understand what was happening. I had reintroduced my name into the conversation, and the effect was exactly as I'd intended: fear and uncertainty. The second email was a masterpiece of benign misdirection. It went directly to Tiffany's inbox. The subject was innocuous: meeting to discuss departmental restructuring. It was a simple summons from the head of human resources, Maria Flores, for a meeting at 11:00 a.m. to discuss potential career development opportunities. I could picture her reading it, a surge of smug triumph washing over her. She would see the words career development and assume her performance at the party, her public dismissal of me, had paid off. She would believe the executives she had been flattering were finally rewarding her ambition. The timing just a day after the party would seem like a direct consequence of her actions, and in a way it was. Just not the way she imagined. She would spend the morning preening, bragging to her subordinates about the promotion she was sure was coming. She would likely mock the old guard who were about to be swept away by her brilliant new vision. She would walk into that 11:00 a.m. meeting like a queen arriving for her coronation, completely unaware that she was not the queen in this story. She was a pawn, perfectly positioned for sacrifice. The trap was set. The pieces were in motion. 2 simple emails sent from an office on the top floor had divided the company into 2 groups: those who were about to be reminded of who held the real power, and the one person who was about to discover she had none at all. All she had to do was walk into the room, and I knew with the certainty of a well-designed algorithm that her hubris would ensure she did. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the main boardroom on the 50th floor of the Nexus Tower was a cavern of anxious whispers. The most powerful people in my company sat around the enormous mahogany table, their faces a mixture of confusion and apprehension. They were speculating wildly, trying to decipher the meaning of the founders-level summons. The double doors swung open. A hush fell over the room. CEO David Chen walked in, his expression grim and unreadable. But he did not take his usual seat. Instead, he stood to the side, his posture one of deference. Then I walked in. I was calm, composed, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit. My hair was neatly styled, my posture erect. A wave of stunned collective silence washed over the room. For most of them, I was a ghost, a name from the company's founding myth, a face seen only in old photographs in the company archives. They stared as if they were seeing a statue step down from its pedestal. I ignored their gawking. I walked with a steady, unhurried pace to the head of the table, to the large leather chair that had remained symbolically empty for a decade. I sat down. The soft sigh of the leather was the only sound in the room. David Chen cleared his throat, his voice formal. Madam Founder. He said, the old honorific echoing with renewed power. The board is assembled. I nodded, my gaze sweeping slowly across the faces of the executives. I saw recognition dawn in the eyes of the few old-timers who remembered me from the early days. In the eyes of the newer, younger VPs, I saw only confusion. They were looking at a poor old woman who had somehow wandered into the seat of power. Thank you for coming, I began. My voice was quiet, without anger or theatrics, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority that cut through the tension. It was the voice of a person who owned the room, the building, and every single person in it. I have been observing this company from a distance for a long time. I continued, letting my eyes meet each of theirs in turn. I have watched it grow, and I have been proud. But pride has become mingled with concern. Recent events, however, have provided a final, clarifying data point. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. It has become clear to me that some of you have forgotten the core principles upon which this company was built. You have forgotten the promises we made. You have mistaken cruelty for strength and arrogance for vision. A sickness has taken root in our culture, a belief that people are disposable. Today, that ends. I let the last two words hang in the air like a verdict. I was not there to negotiate. I was not there to discuss. I was there to remind them. I was the queen returned from exile, and I was about to take back my board. At precisely 11:00 a.m., while I was concluding my address to the board, Tiffany strutted into the Human Resources office on the 15th floor. She wore a victorious smile and a new, expensive dress, ready to accept the promotion she was certain she had earned. She found two people waiting for her. The first was Maria Flores, the head of HR, a stern, no-nonsense woman whose face was a mask of professional neutrality. The second was a man in an impeccably tailored suit. She didn't recognize James Covington, my lawyer, the architect of this moment. Tiffany, thank you for coming. Maria began, her tone devoid of any warmth. Please have a seat. Tiffany sat crossing her legs, the picture of smug confidence. As you know, Maria continued, her voice flat and procedural. Nexus is always evaluating its talent to ensure alignment with our core values. We have identified a new role where we feel your particular skills would be best utilized. Maria slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was a job description. Tiffany's triumphant smile began to falter as she read the words. Her eyes widened, her face paling. Title: Cafeteria Services Associate. Duties: dishwashing, industrial food preparation, maintaining all kitchen and dining area sanitation standards. This is a joke, right? She sputtered, her voice a strangled whisper. The victorious queen had vanished, replaced by a confused, sputtering woman. James Covington spoke for the first time, his voice calm and lethal. I assure you, it is not a joke. It is a probationary role. Your other option is to resign effective immediately for gross misconduct. He paused, then slid a thick file folder across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. This is a preliminary file detailing multiple systematic violations of the company's code of conduct, specifically Article 4, Section B, respect in the workplace. We have documented emails, performance reviews, and sworn statements from no fewer than a dozen of your colleagues and former subordinates. He tapped the folder. We have everything. You called an experienced engineer a relic. You referred to your team as leeches. You created a hostile work environment based on age. You did all of this at a company whose foundational principles explicitly forbid it. So you have a choice. You can accept this new role a chance to learn the dignity of honest labor, or you can resign. If you choose to fight this, we will see you in court. And we will win. Tiffany stared at the file, then back at their impassive faces. She was trapped. The walls she thought were a palace were in fact a prison of her own making. The corporate ladder she had been so eager to climb had led directly to a seat at a very different table, one covered in dirty dishes, and the consequences of her own cruelty. My announcement in the boardroom was not an end. It was a beginning. It was a signal fire. By the end of the day, my office, in conjunction with David Chen, had established an anonymous, secure whistleblower hotline. It was firewalled from the main company servers and reported directly to an independent committee overseen by James Covington's legal firm. We weren't just asking for complaints. We were guaranteeing protection. The floodgates opened. It was as if a dam of fear had broken. For years, dozens of employees had suffered under Tiffany's reign of terror in silence, afraid to speak up for fear of losing their jobs. Now, with the clear signal that the company's founder was watching, they came forward. The hotline was inundated with stories, each one a small, heartbreaking testament to Tiffany's cruelty. We received a mountain of evidence. There were forwarded emails where she referred to older staff as dinosaurs and technophobes who should just retire already. There were records of performance reviews, a clear pattern of her giving glowing evaluations to the young, attractive members of her team, while systematically downgrading the work of experienced staff, building a paper trail to justify their eventual dismissal. One senior programmer submitted an audio recording from a team meeting, his voice trembling as he introduced it. On the recording, you could hear Tiffany mocking his accent, telling him to speak English properly if he wanted to be understood by the important people in the room. He had been with Nexus since the beginning. He had helped me design the very software that now paid her salary. The investigation revealed that Tiffany was not just a bully. She was a profound liability. Her toxic management style was directly responsible for the loss of at least 3 brilliant, long-serving engineers who had quietly quit rather than endure her daily harassment. We had lost decades of institutional knowledge and millions in potential innovation because of her petty tyranny. The paper trail was irrefutable. Each statement, each piece of evidence painted a clear and damning picture of a woman whose cruelty was not an occasional lapse in judgment, but a core feature of her character. She did not just dislike older employees. She saw them as obstacles to be removed. As I reviewed the files with James, the last vestiges of any personal feeling I had about Tiffany evaporated. This was no longer about a slighted mother-in-law. It was about a CEO protecting her company and her people. The woman I saw in these files was a predator who had mistaken a culture of respect for a field of prey. My decision to remove her was no longer just justified. It was a fiduciary and moral necessity. She had not just insulted me. She had declared war on the very soul of my company. That evening, I sat in my quiet apartment reading. My phone, which I had set to silent, lay face down on the end table. I did not need to see it to know what was happening. I could feel the vibrations of desperation begin. Mark returned home from work to find Tiffany in a state of shock, babbling incoherently about a conspiracy about being demoted to a dishwasher. He, of course, did not understand. He assumed it was a mistake, a bizarre corporate error that could be easily fixed. His first instinct was to call me. He expected me to comfort them, to reassure them, to fix this somehow, as I had fixed everything his entire life. He called. The phone on my table vibrated, once then fell silent as the call went to voicemail. He called again, and again. Nothing. The panic would be starting to set in now, a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He was used to immediate access to his mother being a reliable resource he could tap at will. My silence was a language he did not understand. Frantically, he would have looked at Tiffany's paperwork, the official documents from HR. And there, on the signature line, he would have seen it, the name of the company's legal counsel, James Covington. A name from his childhood, a name he associated with his mother's old, boring business dealings. And then the impossible thought would begin to form. A cold, terrifying suspicion that the world was not as he had believed it to be. He would have driven to my apartment, his mind racing. When he arrived, I opened the door, my expression unreadable. I did not invite him in. "Mom, what did you do?" He pleaded, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had stood by and watched me be humiliated. My gaze was unflinching. "I did nothing, Mark," I said, my voice calm and even. "I simply attended a board meeting at the company I founded." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. I watched the color drain from his face as his world tilted on its axis. The quiet, dotty, financially dependent mother he thought he knew evaporated before his eyes, replaced by the stranger standing in front of him. The CEO, the founder, the power. He stumbled backward, speechless. He left. The calls began again, more frantic this time. Pleading voicemails, accusatory texts. I did not listen to them. I did not read them. I simply let them accumulate. By the next morning, my phone screen displayed the silent symphony of his desperation, 99+ missed calls. A number that represented the total collapse of his reality and the final undeniable proof that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The dead weight was no longer answering. The consequences of their actions were not a punishment I inflicted. They were a reality they had built for themselves, brick by brick, insult by insult. I simply removed the foundation they had forgotten was there. Tiffany, unable to face the profound humiliation of trading her manager's blazer for a dishwasher's apron, resigned the next day. She submitted her letter in disgrace, her career in the insular world of Silicon Valley destroyed. The story of her spectacular fall from grace, though not officially confirmed, spread like wildfire through the industry's back channels. No one wanted to hire a manager fired for gross misconduct from a company like Nexus, especially when the whispers involved the mythical founder herself. With Tiffany's 6-figure salary gone, the lavish lifestyle they had built imploded with astonishing speed. I stopped the monthly wire transfers that covered their mortgage. I stopped the anonymous deposits into their travel and luxury funds. The river of my silent support had run dry. Suddenly, the mortgage payments they could no longer afford became terrifyingly real. The leases on their 2 German luxury cars were now unsustainable burdens. The country club membership, Tiffany's primary stage for social climbing, became an impossible extravagance. Their world, once a glittering facade of success, began to crumble. For my son Mark, the financial collapse was secondary to the psychological one. He was forced to confront 2 devastating realities at once. The first was that the woman he had married was not just ambitious, but fundamentally cruel. He could no longer ignore the pattern of her behavior, now laid bare by the corporate investigation. The second, and perhaps more shattering, was that the mother he had treated like a piece of furniture, a gentle, slightly dotty houseplant, was a titan of industry. The weight of his passivity, of all the times he had stood by in silence while Tiffany chipped away at my dignity, came crashing down on him. He saw his complicity for what it was, a betrayal, not just of me, but of himself. He had allowed his wife to diminish the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a life of privilege, a woman whose power he could not even comprehend. He was left in the ruins of a life built on a foundation of disrespect, with the full and terrible knowledge that he had enabled its destruction. Within 6 months, they were forced to sell the beautiful home I had bought for them. Watching the "for sale" sign go up on the lawn was not a moment of triumph for me. It was a moment of profound sadness, the ultimate symbol of their failure. They had been given a kingdom and had managed to burn it to the ground, all for the sake of their own arrogance. It was not revenge, it was reality. I did not revel in their downfall. Watching the life they had built crumble brought me no joy, only a profound and weary sadness. My focus was not on their ruin, but on my reclamation. The problem had never been just Tiffany. She was merely the most virulent symptom of a disease that had infected my company's culture. Now I had to be the cure. Working closely with David Chen and James Covington, I began the process of rebuilding. We didn't just fire a bully, we dismantled the systems that had allowed her to thrive. Our first act was to make the whistleblower hotline a permanent, independent fixture of the company. We established a new, powerful Employee Dignity and Ethics Committee comprised of veteran staff from all levels of the company, and gave it the authority to investigate any manager and override their decisions if a pattern of abuse was found. We were taking power out of the hands of individuals and placing it into a system of community oversight. Next, we tackled the performance review process. The toxic, competitive, up-or-out culture that had allowed people like Tiffany to flourish was abolished. In its place, we instituted a new system that rewarded mentorship, collaboration, and the retention of institutional knowledge. Managers would now be bonused, based not on how many people they fired, but on how many people they mentored and promoted from within. We explicitly penalized the kind of behavior that Tiffany had championed, but the most important work was personal. I asked David to arrange private meetings with the employees Tiffany had tormented the most. I met with Bill, the head of QA she had mocked and tried to force out. I sat with the senior programmer whose accent she had ridiculed. I met with a half-dozen others, men and women in their 50s and 60s, who had given decades of their lives to Nexus, only to be made to feel like relics. In each meeting, I did something I had not done in a very long time. I apologized. Not as a distant founder, but as the woman who had made them a promise long ago. "I am sorry," I said to each of them. I am sorry that the culture of respect I promised you was violated. I am sorry that you were made to feel worthless. That is not what Nexus stands for. That is not what I stand for. It was not about blame, but about accountability. I offered them their dignity back along with promotions and back pay for their suffering. I rehired 2 of the brilliant engineers who had quit because of Tiffany personally calling them and asking them to come back to help me fix what was broken. I was not just reclaiming a company, I was reclaiming its soul. I was reinforcing the foundation of respect I had laid down in that cold garage decades ago. It was a slow, difficult process, but with each small act of restoration, I felt the company I loved, the company that was my true legacy, beginning to breathe again. I am standing in my private office on the top floor of the Nexus Tower, a space I have not set foot in for years. The furniture is still the same simple functional pieces I chose myself, but it is covered in a thin layer of dust, a testament to my long absence. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling city glitters below a vast circuit board of light and life that my company helped build. I take a sip of my tea, the warmth a comforting presence in my hands. I have reclaimed my legacy, not through shouting or anger, but through the quiet, methodical application of the power I earned in a cold garage all those years ago. It was not revenge. It was a course correction, a reassertion of first principles. My phone has been silent for weeks now. The frantic calls from Mark have stopped. I hear through James that he and Tiffany have separated. He is living in a small, rented apartment across town, working a mid-level job at another company. Perhaps one day, he will understand the true cost of his silence, the profound nature of his betrayal. Perhaps not. But that is his burden to carry now, not mine. My work as his mother is done. My work as the founder of this company, however, has just begun again. I turn from the window, my expression one of serene peace. The house is quiet now, not an empty quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels earned. The kind of quiet that has weight and substance. It is the quiet of a foundation settled and strong. If you have ever been called a burden, if you have ever been made to feel invisible in your own home, if you have ever been told you are a relic from a time that no longer matters, then know this: you are not a ghost. You are not a weight. You are not done yet. You were never the dead weight. You were always the foundation, and a house built without a foundation is destined to fall. I told this story not for pity and not for revenge. I told it for the woman listening right now who's been made to feel invisible in her own kitchen, in her own family, in her own name. My story is not just mine. It belongs to every mother who has been told she is in the way. If this story stirred something in you, some quiet ache, some buried memory, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done? Here at True Stories. She never told we don't whisper the past. We speak it with clarity. Thank you for watching True Stories. She never told. Your presence here gives a voice to the silent. Don't forget to subscribe to True Stories. She never told, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Because you are not invisible, you are not crazy, and you are not done yet.